he got off the committee by joining something else. Okay, so we also have Max from the community, our district manager, and a number of community board members. I see, let's see, Louisa Craddock, Madeline Innocent, Ken Coughlin, Madge Rosenberg, Ethel Sheffer, Mark Diller, Rich Robbins, Shelley Fine, Kate Carpin, Seema Reddy, Miranda, well, I don't see Miranda, I see her name, Roberta Seamer, and a community member, Maria Danzelo. Thank you for joining us. So I just wanted to start off by saying how much great input we got from everybody. We've been working on this, as everyone's heard, for quite some time. It's amazing. The last, I don't know, period of time I've either spoken to or had emails from a lot of people with a lot of input. My desk is frightening. It's got a lot of pages on it. So I just want to thank everybody for your input. I want to kick off by saying there are a number of changes we've made already. This is a kind of rolling thunder thing. What we have here is these are things that were brought up at the full board meeting, which we've already, agreed were good points. Ira Michnick is not here, but he did the best job ever of debunking the 75% attendance. Ira did a tremendous demonstration of how that does not work. I
couldn't agree more.
Excuse me?
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, can everyone mute themselves just until I get through this?
Okay.
So I just wanted to say that I've removed the egg from my face on that one. That was not my idea, but the egg is now gone. Okay, so what we're going to do with that is return it to what it is in the current bylaws, which is 7 of 12 meetings. Richard Ash suggested 25% attendance, but I have an MBA, not a CPA. I don't think that'd be easy to track either. So we're just going to leave it the way it was. The biennial elections, fortunately, that's been nixed. That was hard to spell, very confusing. We're going to go back to annual elections. And good luck to people who choose to run for, oh, good morning, Courtney. Courtney's here. Good luck to people who want to run for that. It's a lot of work. The reasoning behind going to a biennial or every other year election was to make it a little less time consuming, but no luck there. So we'll to have annual elections. We're also going to stick with the 3 one-year terms. And we have Bev Donahue, also excellent. When I say we're going to stick with that, all I mean is that that's our proposal. So that was, it's in the draft. So it's a change to the draft. The requirement to make any changes or amendments to the bylaws, we picked up from the borough president's template the 2/3 majority. We didn't even think about it. We were surprised how much attention and interest that got. We're going to change that to a majority. And then finally, I'm sorry to Clary for this, because she was pleased to see it was removed, but it was an accident to remove Robert's Rules of Order. So that's back in. And I have to say, my husband, when we first got appointed to this, got me a hardcover copy of Robert's Rules of Order, so he's pleased about that. Okay, so 2 clarifications. I think a number of you have already heard about this, but the first one is the removal for cause notion. And I want to say in all capital letters in bold and hot pink, my favorite color, that full board approval is needed for the removal of any member. There is no scenario, repeat, no scenario where any single person can assassinate another member of the board and just get rid of one person. That's not how this works. The only change here is that rather than going to the steering committee, which can be as many as 25 people or 20 people, all of whom are appointed by one person, that'd be the chair of the board. Now the suggestion is that we would go to the executive committee for the first review of any complaint. I think it was Blanche made a great suggestion that we have any sort of complaint that's going to the executive committee, that it should be in writing. I think that's a great suggestion. This way it's not like, oh, some random person who you don't know who it is. I mean, the whole thing is uncomfortable. It's a very rare situation, but in the case where somebody wants to suggest that somebody should be, considered for removal from the board, my strong feeling on this would be that it should go to the executive committee. The executive committee is a much smaller group. I worked in headhunting for 15 years. I'm well aware of how important it is for privacy and discretion and to minimize the risk to someone's reputation. And by going to the executive committee on this first, instead of to the steering committee, it minimizes the number of people who are involved in the initial discussion. After the executive committee reviews a request in writing from a member, it would then go to the full board if the executive committee thinks it's worth going forward, and if the member wants to go forward. The member already has the option to just withdraw. It doesn't have to go to the public. So it gives a lot more protection to the individual members, in my opinion. The next thing is conflict of interest. We have removed the very unpopular word avocational, and we've also clarified what the word advisor means. It's not advisor like Shelley is, a world ranked expert on education. And when Shelley gives advice to somebody on education matters, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a member of an advisory board, somebody who's got an official capacity as an advisor. That's what this is. I just want to clarify that. So without further ado, what I'd like to do to kick off the meeting is, if everybody wouldn't mind turning on their pictures, I'm going to call on some people who haven't had a chance to speak. I think that might be a good way to go about this. I'm going to start with Louisa, because I know you and I had a conversation, and I want you to give you a chance to unmute, because I know sometimes you're muting challenged. But Louisa had a good conversation, and she had a couple of changes, and I do want to mention a couple of them I've made already. Louisa pointed out that we have the term valid quorum, and that's like completely meaningless. So it's not a valid quorum, it's just a quorum. So that's one suggestion she made. And there was something else that was pretty straightforward. I think you also suggested in the voting section to move the example of the quorum. A number of people suggest this, move it closer to number 1, because that's where the example goes, so that you don't have to hunt and look for it, because people don't really look that much. So without further ado, Louisa, if you can unmute. Did you have any thoughts you want to share with the group? It gave you a lot of preambles, so you could, oh, good.
It was a big preamble, but I think you covered most of what I had suggested had been picked up, or we discussed it. I'm just going through what I had. The only thing, and I know you said it's been decided, but I just want to mention it, that the idea of having 1-year terms, I think that is too short period. It takes a long time to acclimate, even if you've been on the board for a long time. Once you are the chair, it takes a while to acclimate yourself to how it works, who you can move around to, what positions, etc. I really would like to advocate again for 2-year terms for the chair and members of the executive committee, and with a cap on the number of terms, of basically 2 terms. That would be 4 years. The person can come back afterwards, but I think that a 2-year term really works better for the benefit of the community board.
Great, thanks so much. The next person I want to call on is Madeline. And before I call on Madeline, I want to say that Madeline had a great suggestion about, we had a great conversation, and she had a wonderful suggestion about the advocacy issue to do with the media contact. Not to steal your thunder here, Madeline, but I thought it was, I want to make sure you get a hat tip for this. Nobody wants to muzzle anybody who was an advocate for something because they joined the community board. Can everyone unmute? Yes, Jay?
Just quickly, before we go on to a different subject, can I just do a very brief comment on the history of the term thing, apropos to what Louisa was just talking about?
I'd rather hold it until we get to
Okay.
the discussion. Thanks so much. And can everyone mute except for the person who's speaking? Great. So Madeline had a great suggestion about advocacy. And so what I've done is drafted some language that addresses that. It says basically, if you're an advocate for something, we encourage you to continue your advocacy as long as it's not a member that's not an item or an issue that's currently before the board. That would be the only restriction on that. So I want to be really clear here. The whole term gag rule, I think is unfair. No one's looking to gag anybody here. I gagged when I heard the term gag rule. Let's put it that way. So with that being said, Madeline, if you had any other thoughts you wanted to share, I think
Yeah, the only thing I was concerned about, I don't know how other people were appointed to the board, but part of my advocacy was the reason why I was appointed to the board. I somewhat feel stifled because when I testify at any of the city council meetings, or I go to any town hall meetings, I'm not sure I'm going to speak. It just comes out. So I'm not there saying I'm speaking on behalf of Community Board 7. It's just that something triggers whatever the person is saying, so I speak up. I don't think a board member should be penalized for that. I was chastised, and I had just started on the board. I was chastised about speaking out at an event for Scott Stringer. I wasn't home but a half hour, and I got yelled at. How dare you go to a meeting and speak out on Community Board 7? I didn't even know anybody knew I was on the board. So I was speaking from my heart and for my community. So what got me on the board now is stifled, and I cannot speak like I should or want to. I don't think that if a reporter comes up to me and says, well, can I ask you about this? I'll say, hold on a minute, let me go call the chair and make sure it's okay. I look as stupid as that question is proposed. So I don't think there should be something in place that whatever got that person on the board, they should be able to still process and continue with, because I know people are probably thinking, well, why don't you resign from the board? I don't want to resign from the board because I'm a part of the community that I should have my voice heard. So there should be some balance in that a person can still have their voice out there, but still be a board member and respect the bylaws of that board. That's my big concern.
That sounds great. Thanks, Madeline. Thanks for being concise. Just so people understand the process here, we've been taking in lots of good input from folks. The draft is in a state of flux, to say the least. And my goal here is to incorporate all the changes, to do one draft that's got clear edits on it, and then send that out so people can see after the task force has seen it, and then send it out prior to next week's meeting, well in advance of that. And then people can see how we've incorporated all of the input. So today's meeting is really, just so people know, it's not to decide anything, it's just to take in as much more input as we can. So I think that the way we're heading on that, Madeline, the way I'm heading on it, is to address that really clearly, because no one wants someone stifled. The word advocacy is something I'm going to suggest, and I'm going to call it the Madeline clause.
Don't do that.
Okay. All right. But at any rate, you get the gist of it. And that's not what I was looking for. And the word the words prior authorization are gone. I think what we would look to is something like notification. And people have talked about, someone comes up to me right on the spot. I don't want to have to stop and text mom or dad and say I'm doing this. That's not what we're looking for here. And I think most people know what the issue is here. Okay. Let me call on, we've got a member of the community here, Maria D'Angelo. Thank you for joining us on a Thursday morning. If you have a chance, are you still there? Do you want to talk? Did I catch you off guard?
All right. I'm just unmuting my phone here. Good morning, and thank you for calling on me, and thank you for doing this great, important work. I just want to say my own conflicts. I'm an advisor to the group New Yorkers for Competitive Elections, and I'm an endorsed candidate by a good government group called New York Unite. And I'm also a candidate for New York State Senate for the 30th District. We are waiting for the new lines to come out, which should be in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But we did get some good news yesterday that they're not going to require us to repetition, so that's great. I just wanted to speak to a couple of issues, because the issue of governance and good governance throughout all government offices, as well as quasi-government ones like community boards, is of great importance to me, because it builds trust in government. It helps with transparency. And I think overall, we're at such a critical point in New York and the state and the country around distrust. And so I think this work that you're doing is of really, really great importance to all of that. And just last night, I was on a meeting where a candidate for governor called New York the most corrupt state in the country, a Democratic candidate, and quoted some statistics around just how corrupt our government is. So any work anyone can do to try to, break through that is of great importance. So just in terms of, and I'll try to be quick, in terms of my background, I'm a lawyer, and in my I worked in-house as a lawyer for a large corporation, and I was in charge of their conflicts of interest policy. I actually wrote it and administered it for 25 years, and it was mostly around the issue of Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, but also it was very important that we had trust in people who worked in the company, that they weren't going to do things that were a conflict. It's fair for the shareholders, it's fair for everyone. I just wanted to, I do have thoughts on a lot of sections, but I just wanted to focus on the conflict section. And the first thing I wanted to say is that the city and the state both have, we have conflicts of interest policies. I personally don't think they go far enough, but at a very minimum, our community boards need to follow those policies. Our conflicts of interest boards, I don't think are as effective as they need to be. I think there are a lot of conflicts that get by that shouldn't. And when I ran for city council last year, I was asked to sign the conflicts policy. And I have to tell you, as somebody who knows a little bit about this subject, I was also very, very disappointed that it didn't ask me more questions, that it didn't get further into the kind of conflicts that really would hurt someone's ability to act independently and in the best interests of the public. I also feel just that it's kind of a conflict for people who have a conflict to be arguing about whether a policy should be a broader policy. And I know that happens at the state level. It happened recently with Governor Hochul when she didn't go far enough in revising the conflicts of interest policy. So I think it's important that we have independent outlooks on this. And that's one of the things I've been most impressed with this group and the work you've been doing. I really get the sense you really are looking at it from, what's best for, what's best for good governance. So that's really, really good. So it's really up to you as the committee how far you want to go on conflicts. I know at a minimum, you must comply with state and city conflicts laws, and that's in the I have the quotes for you. It's the
That's
it's
okay. Yeah.
you have all of that. Okay, so so you can do that yourself. But in terms of whether you want to go further and
No, we don't. We can't go further than that. But thank you. Yeah,
that's fine. That's basically my points. We have to sort of get to the issue of special interests and lobbyists. And, I think that everybody, including anyone who works, I'm thinking of the great people you have on the community board, Shelley Fine and many people who are doing just incredible work. The point of a good conflicts policy is not to cut back on their work at all. It's really to just make it clear to the public that when they are speaking and when they are voting, they shouldn't be voting on matters where there is a conflict. First of all, they should recuse themselves from that. But in part of their role on the community board, identifying who they are, making it clear to the public, these are all really the critical issues that I think get at the conflicts, a good conflicts policy.
great.
Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your input. It's great to have a community member here. I just want to be really clear here that we are not going any further than any law. We are not a legislative body.
Sure.
Yeah, so we're not writing any law. And I also want to make clear that Shelley's really involved already. I'm not sure we want to encourage Shelley to be more. No, I'm kidding. But the next person who mentions Shelley's name gets the Triple Daily Award. Okay. At any rate, here's the thing about conflict of interest, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. I want to hear from more people who haven't spoken yet. But conflict of interest, we did not create any of this language out of thin air. This was all based on the charter, particularly chapter 68, and also the New York City rules. And we have not one but two lawyers on our task force. I know you're supposed to have an odd number of lawyers in any group. Mark Diller pointed that out to me yesterday, but we have two lawyers, and we've had a lot of really good research done on this. And I'm not a lawyer, but I've been involved in way too many legal events, and I've looked into it as well. So we are not writing legislation here. We are simply incorporating what's in the city charter in our bylaws. And a lot of it's stuff that was already in the current bylaws. So who else do we have? We haven't heard from Seema, really. Seema, were you able to speak at last week's meeting? I don't think you were.
No, I wasn't. I thought the changes that you have proposed since our last meeting were really fantastic and right on. My only question is about the 75% attendance and what takes its place, as we have discussed. The issue comes up pretty much at every single full board meeting and steering committee meeting about what actually sort of constitutes attendance. There's some board member, life gets in the way, of course. Some people attend, hours late. How do we as a board want to think about that? And I mentioned to Susan that coupled with our rather generous excused absences policy, I felt like having a more strict definition of attendance would be, would make sense, would go hand in hand, but I'm open to suggestions. But having a clear line on that, I think would be very helpful to the secretaries.
Yeah, I've had quite a bit of discussion about this with both Seema and Beverly, who are both here. And if I could just quickly talk about this, and then we'll get back to comments. This, as I said, the 75% is gone because that's hard to manage. I did find something really interesting. Community Board 2 does something great, which is on the cover sheet. They list 4 categories for attendance. They break it out. It's not just present, and you're either binary present or not present. CB2 does it so that you are, hold on one second. You are present, you are absent with notification, you are absent, which I guess would be an unexcused absence. You're present / arrived late, or you're present and left early. And then they also have board staff present, and they also list guests. So they really, they go like quite a distance here to say who was at the meeting. I think that would be a great policy. I sent that to Seema and Beverly and Max, and they all thought it was a good idea. And I think the intent here is not to pass judgment on it, but simply just to take note of who's doing what, and then let somebody who's in the position of making a decision about it do something with that information. So if there's a consistent pattern, and it doesn't say how late you arrived, we would have to figure out what that means. It was more than half an hour, it's more than, whatever it is. But that's the idea, is that if there's a consistent pattern that you come late and you leave early, then someone should notice that. Because if you're not there for the community session, for example, it's the community board. You're supposed to be listening to the community, so you shouldn't just arrive after the community has spoken. That's not great. So the excused versus unexcused is really important. And we do have a generous policy for that. And since we do, I think it's important that people, take advantage of that and let whoever is the chair of the meeting know you're not going to come and what the reason is. And then finally, we want to shift the responsibility for tracking the attendance back to the district manager and the assistant district manager, because that's what it used to be when we were in-person meetings. And right now that burden is falling on the co-secretaries, and they've already got their hands full, and that's not fair. And I know that's been a real source of stress and strain for you guys. So that's that addresses some of that stuff. I hope it does. Let's move on with comments from people who haven't really spoken, and that would be Madge Rosenberg. Madge, if you can unmute it, would be great. Unmute. Madge, you're not muted. You're muted.
Okay. I agree with everything Madeline said. I came to it from a very different point. I came onto the board sort of representing small business interests at the time, and I was very free to speak in favor of small business interests a couple of times, even to the press. So I think you really have to be able to do your advocacy, whether it's for your community, small business, whatever it happens to be, which is your reason for being on the board often. And that's just all I wanted to add, that it shouldn't be so difficult. And as long as you make clear that you're not speaking for the board, but you're speaking personally, that should be doable.
Great, thanks so much. Courtney, you spoke very briefly to me. If you want to unmute.
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to make a comment about attendance. I obviously agree with what Seema was talking about. I think it's become a real issue of people repeatedly not showing up for their committee meetings. You sent me the thing about recording, showing up early, showing up late. I just really worry about how difficult that might be in terms of an onus on people in order of keeping track on that and when people leave. I wasn't sure if Zoom has some sort of ability to record that, because that might make it easier while we are still living in Zoom world, in which case I think that's a great idea. But I really do have some concerns about not having some sort of metric, some sort of guidance in place on what attendance is expected to be. They've told us over and over again that Community Board 7 has one of the highest application rates every year. I find it really appalling that we have so many people who want to be part of this community board and each year don't make it. And then we have people who actually are appointed to the board who don't bother to show up month after month after month. And it also really puts the onus on the other committee members to do everything, to take minutes, to be there to ensure we have quorum in case we need to take a vote. I know on YAL, we barely make barely make quorum every month. We're waiting for that last person so that if we need to vote on something, we can. It's really appalling to me that we couldn't put a number. And why are we taking attendance if there's no metric by which we can say to people, this is not acceptable? And so I don't have a problem, and I think we shouldn't have a problem with saying there are expectations. You sign up for this when you join this board, and here are expectations. That you make a certain number of meetings. We all have things come up. We, as you pointed out, we have that generous excused absence policy. There should be a number of how many absences you have that are not excused, by at which point you're saying you are no longer a working member of this board and you need to step down so that we can let someone from the community who is willing to make the commitment and show up take your place. That's what I have to say about the attendance. And I don't really understand the arguments against an attendance metric. I have that for my kids. You have to do a certain number of things. You have to do your chores. You have to go to school. I don't understand why we wouldn't be okay with a similar metric here. That's all.
Well put. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the how to track it, Max is looking into whether or not Zoom does provide that information. I don't know how far he's gotten on that since he's got a lot of stuff to do. But one thing I had thought of, unfortunately, we no longer have chat because of the open meetings law concern. But perhaps we could have people be required to do what they used to do in chat, which is say, so and so present in the meeting, put that in the Q&A, and that way there's a timestamp on it. And then also do the same thing when you're leaving. Say, so and so leaving the meeting. And if you don't, we could treat it the same way they treat it on the New Jersey Turnpike. If you no longer have your ticket when you get off of the Turnpike, you're charged for the entire length of the Turnpike. So in this case, if you don't, log out, it's as if you were never really there. So there's an incentive to actually do it. So that would be a good way to do it. And then once we do go back to in-person meetings, which I know Jay is anxious to do, and a number of other people are, we would have it so that, you sign in at the back with either Max or Jesse or somebody from the district office. And then at the end, you sign out with that person as well. There was a long stretch when I first joined the board where nobody was watching that sheet. So people would come in late, sign in, they would leave early, sign out. They would submit their entire voting sheet when they left early, and then it looked as if they'd been at the entire meeting. Another way to track this would be to take a look back at the voting sheets and see who's voting toward the end of the meeting. So there are ways to take attendance and really bear down on this. And I want to let people know, I've heard from more people about attendance than I have about any other topic, including conflict of interest. So it's something that people really care about. And the thing is, the people who are coming really care about it. And I think, as Courtney says, a lot of people want to be on the board. So if you don't have the time or you have other commitments, you can't do it, then you should not be on the board. Miranda, I haven't heard from you. Would you like to unmute and say something?
Hi, I'm just here listening for now. And my biggest question was the update on the draft and where we could see the changes, but you answered that already. So I'm just here listening for now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. So with that being said, what I'd like to do is we covered attendance. I'd like to talk about decorum. I know that one person had a real strong concern about the word decorum, felt that it was, I don't know how to say this, but a very strong feeling about the word decorum. And so where I think I'd like to suggest that we go is to basically a code of conduct that's just becoming. And the concerns come in things like, eating on camera, drinking alcohol on camera, conduct that's not becoming. In our current bylaws, we talk about respect and collegiality. So I want to take it, just clarify that, because I have heard from a lot of people about this, concerns that these meetings are recorded and they're there for forever. And so the board members should look like, professional members of a community board. So open it up to a couple of questions or comments about that if we can. Rich, do you have a comment about decorum?
I don't. I have a lot of other comments, but I'd like to have the opportunity to mention other things. Decorum is not high on my list.
Okay. Can you all lower your hands? If anybody has a comment about decorum, can you raise your hand? Raise your hand just physically so I can see you have a comment about. Louisa, you have a comment about decorum? Now you have to unmute.
Louisa, you're muted.
Got it. I'm on my phone and it keeps switching back and forth. Okay. Decorum is a really odd word. It's a somewhat old-fashioned word. I think we can cover it all by just saying that everybody's expected to act in a professional manner, period. Covers everything. You can use the word conduct, but I think decorum is a little odd. That's it.
Okay. Let me just give me 1 second here. I'm just taking a look at another screen. So what I think is important here is the notion that you won't interfere. And I want to say Richard Ashe is not here today, but he did a very, very close read of the bylaws and sent a lot of really good language. And a lot of this is from Richard. So I'll just read it aloud. Members shall not interfere with the orderly conduct of a meeting. Members shall refrain from unbecoming behavior. And then this next part, I think people will talk about this a lot. As a courtesy to, this is from Richard, as a courtesy to other members in the public, members are encouraged to prepare remarks in advance if possible and present views concisely. Members may express views by noting agreement with the prior speaker without reiterating the comments. This provision is in no way intended to prevent any member from expressing a view or presenting facts pertinent to the matter at hand. And then this last sentence is something that's in the current bylaws, but we had left it out by mistake. Board members shall not speak more than twice on a specific item except with permission from the meeting chairperson. So it's taken out the word decorum and it's sort of addressed basic code of conduct. Ethel, you have a brief comment on this? You've spoken on it pretty extensively at the full board meeting. You want to unmute?
Okay, is that okay?
Yeah.
Susan? Yes, very, very quickly. First of all, I'm very glad you left that out. Secondly, if I may suggest to you, the use of the word professional to conduct oneself in a professional manner, I do not agree with that word.
That word is not in there.
I would go to, if I may.
Ethel, I'm sorry, that word is not, the word professional is not in there.
Oh, okay, but you were just using it in your statement. Okay, but everything, I do agree with the comments just that you read from Richard. I think that there's 2 points quickly. It is that it is a collegial relationship. It is one or collaborative relationship because we are all volunteers and appointed, and so we have to respect the regular decorum, God, that word, of any meeting. Secondly, I do believe that the inclusion of Robert's Rules of Order is a perfectly good thing, and there's much in there. It's not rigid, but the chair or anybody else can use that as a matter of good conduct. I think that's all very important. We should not prescribe unduly, but we should let everyone know that there are some rules. Lastly, the example from Madeline of a long time ago, that is of course terrible on, expressing points of view. That's absolutely out of the realm of how community board people may conduct themselves. On that very last point, and I did write some comments to you, Susan, which I hope you will share. In general, the charter mandated for community boards and others on conflicts of interest is extremely helpful and is important, and we all have to know what's in there. And then if there is a question, it can be put by the individual or members of the executive committee directly to the conflicts of interest, and they will answer you. I mean, it's part of their job. So okay. I would suggest those kinds of things. And in general, lastly, I believe, Susan and others, we are coming out of a long, difficult period of confusion and complexity of Zoom, personal attendance, and so on. We're now about to go into, I think, clearer rules about the importance of attendance, direct attendance, and some of the needs about Zoom. This will be helping us. We're going to be in a better place of not the confusions, complexities, basically anarchy of the last years. We're about to be regulated, but in a good way, and we can make some of the specific rules. There is no reason to assume that board 2 on the other point is works better than we do. I'm quite sure that it doesn't. So let's be aware. Let's not over regulate behavior, but be as clear as possible of what the conduct should be without being as if we're with a schoolmaster that's far away and is telling us what to do. We
Okay,
should
thank you so much.
know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I realize, so I just want to say that I do not think I was suggesting that board 2 is better than us. What we're simply trying to do is cast a wide net and try to see if there are good things we can take from other places. I also don't agree with the characterization that it's a schoolmaster, or that we're trying to overly regulate. The thing about the attendance, Ethel, is the suggestion that we should be collecting the data and then presenting it to the people in charge so that they can make the decisions, because the borough president's office does take a look at that. Madeline, I see your hand up. You have a question comment specifically about this?
I just want to draw attention to this. When I was appointed to the board, my only issue was public housing. I hadn't picked a second committee yet. I went to most of all the committees to find out what they were about and what interests me. Now, my point in that saying, I still go to other committees. So in attendance sake, is that being accounted as well, going to other committees, or are you focusing on that committee? Because I do other projects as well on the committee. So how are you distinguishing between those two?
The way that's written right now, and I think this is a good way to do it, is you're assigned to at least 2 standing committees, and your attendance is judged against that and the full board. If you're a co-chair, you're required to be at steering because you're only on your one committee. If you want to go to extra committees, rock on. But you're not being judged. I think Ira at the full board meeting said, he shows up sometimes at a committee, like, I do sometimes at transportation or HHS or some other committee I'm not on officially, and I want to show up for just one particular topic agenda. If you're not there for the whole meeting, it's not your committee, that doesn't count. It says in the meeting minutes if you were in attendance, and that's nice, but it's not part of your attendance record. I realize, Kay, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I realize I didn't call on you. I know that we had a little back and forth. Did you have anything you wanted to add? Because you didn't have a chance to speak at the full board meeting.
Sure, I'll throw it on decorum. I think, well, or whatever we're going to call it. I think we've kind of covered it. I had a concern about ad hominem attacks, which are rare, but pretty, they cast us all in a bad light. I don't know if there's anything that should be said about that, or if that's so obvious that we can disagree with people without attacking them or whatever. Maybe that's too obvious, and maybe it's too rare, but it is pretty awful when it happens. I think we've covered a lot of the other things. I think softening the language around media contact. Sometimes Michelle or I will get contacted about the details of an upcoming meeting, and I don't think I should go to Stephen to say, oh, it's public's welcome, here's how you do it, at all. And what else? Yeah, and I think we've had a good discussion around attendance. I agree with Courtney, super important. I hope we're not on Zoom forever, I really do. While we are, I appreciate, Susan, in the beginning of this meeting, you invited us to turn our cameras on, not to be intrusive or anything, but just, I think that's one way that we can be together in this interim time. Obviously, there's some times when it's just not going to work, or we're on our phone or whatever, So, and then on conflict of interest, yeah, lots to be said about that. But I think, I can more easily see your conflict of interest than I can my own. I think that's probably fair to say. So I think that's an ongoing discussion.
My personal conflict of interest or somebody else's?
Anybody else's.
Okay, good. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, not yours.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, thanks so much. Let me just go down, quick look at my checklist. Another couple quick things.
I'm sorry, Susan, I've been raising my hand for a while.
Sure.
Can I?
Or
Miranda, yeah?
Yeah. Hi, I just wanted to go back to the decorum. I just want to be careful about like when we assume what's a standard of conduct. And if there's any way for flexibility in the language that kind of allows for maybe a different interpretation, because I think sometimes some of these things that maybe some people think are standard are not. And I think, I don't know, I'm maybe don't have the most cogent thought on this yet, but I just want to be able to give people flexibility, given that if we are still in a Zoom world and, you know, if people, I just want to be careful about assuming things that are a standard of conduct and kind of enforcing them unfairly, if that makes sense.
Can you give an example of that?
I mean, I do think that just some people think that whether it's eating on camera or drinking on camera, obviously drinking alcohol, you know, if someone's obviously inebriated, that's a different story. But, you know, especially our full board meetings are, you know, usually 4 hours long around dinner time. I think it's a question of like, if someone would rather see someone eat versus not see a camera at all, you know, that's one thing. And another thing is also the time of speaking, or the speaking time length. I'm not sure if that's of interest to be put like formally into the bylaws. But I know that that's also an issue on our board, and there are a lot of tools to circumvent that, whether there's timers or things like that. But I do think we waste a lot of time in the meetings talking about the length of time rather than just letting people speak and moving on. So those are just two issues I wanted to bring up.
So are you in favor of a time limit or not?
I am, if it's consistent and clear. So there are timers that we can add on Zoom that are really clear for everyone to see, to make sure that no one's alleging, well, this person had more time to speak and this person didn't. I just personally am not a fan of like the amount of time we waste talking about the time limit in the meetings. I think if we totaled the time that we talked about people talking too much in the meetings, we would have a lot more time back. So thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. I think for those of you who were at the preservation special meeting last Thursday, the timer was used on the screen. It was a really great tool, I think. And there was a lot of a lot of great feedback about that. A lot of other boards do that. And frankly, they do it with the elected officials as well. Somebody mentioned a long time ago in one of our task force meetings that in their elected houses, if you will, like a city council and the state legislature, there are time limits. So when they're in their own homes, they have a time limit. And in our bylaws, it says there's a time limit. Every other board has a time limit for elected officials to speak, particularly for elected officials, since they have unfettered access to the media and lots of places where they can reach out. That might be a place where we could really save some time if we use the clock there as well. But I take your points about the decorum issue. I think the alcohol thing early on in Zoom, we did have an issue with inebriation on camera, and that was a bad thing. So one other quick thing to mention, Richard Ashe suggested that the candidate statements for the election should not be limited to 250 words. In writing this written statement, it should be 500 words, and I think that's a fine suggestion. And then he also suggested under executive session for the full board that we should add another reason for going to executive session, and that's matters relating to proposed discipline or removal of a member. Then it should be voted on by the majority of those present. Mark Diller had some great comments about definition of the word majority. So that's thank you, Mark, for that. So with that being said, why don't we go to affiliations and conflict of interest, because I know those are great areas of great interest. I'm sorry, before we do, Beverly, do you have a comment on something not to do with those two things?
Yeah, I did. Very quickly, just 2 points concerning the recently passed law on that would enable hybrid meetings. I think our bylaws are going to need to have an amendment once we amend them for the work that your task force has done, because they have implications for behavior. My reading of the new law suggests that you have to show your video, for example. And I understand that in a 4-hour meeting, you could get up and deal with something for a few minutes and come back. But for the most part, you're supposed to have your video on. I don't know whether that's something we should include in the bylaws at this point or not, but that also the criteria for excused absence for an in-person meeting, and as opposed to being available on video, is something that that Elizabeth's task force is presumably developing. So I wanted to understand if you had conversation with her about how your work and hers kind of fit together, and at what point we would join them, so to speak.
Great questions. The path we're taking here is that we're going to get this finalized, because it's a lot of work, and I'm not hold it up for that one piece of it, which is still in tremendous flux. And the consensus has been from most people I've spoken to that that's a good way to approach that, then not to hold this up. I think Howard has a great expression. Mark, what is it? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Something like that. So we would come back and do an amendment probably in the fall at some point, once, the infection rate, whatever it's called, blah, blah rate is up now to 15% in 10023. So who knows, what the future holds. I certainly do not. So to hold this up for the hybrid meetings. Also, Elizabeth is running that task force. We've been in contact about this, but that's a separate effort. And once they have come to some conclusion, and I don't know where they'll get to on that, then we will incorporate that and be happy to do it. Does anybody else have a question about anything other than affiliations and conflict of interest? Roberta, you're raising your hand. Yes.
I just wanted to go back to time limits.
Sure.
So when we looked at the bylaws in 2012, 2013, one of the things we did look at was that people spoke for a very long time, and very often it was the same 5 people and other people didn't have a chance to speak, which is one of the reasons we put it at 2. It's also the discretion of the chair. So there were meetings when I was chair when we agreed at steering that each person would be allowed to speak once and only once, because, with 50 board members, if they each spoke even for 1 minute, you're at an hour. So certain things are at the discretion of the chair, but I think time limits are important. The elected reps were always willing to use the 1 minute limit. And I think when people know ahead of time, they can plan properly.
Thank you. Shelley, a question about
something else. On the something else. The something else is what Madeline had elucidated on. I think there should be no situation where the chair has to be consulted as long as the person says, I am not speaking as a member of the board. I can think of 100 situations, my own. I'm president of Wistfish, and someone asks about a project. That project's coming before the board. At the board, I'll say, I'm president of Wistfish. I'm not going to vote on this. I'm declaring and speak, possibly. But in public, I can talk about whatever I want. I think it's restricting freedom of speech, and that could be on anything, as long as you're making it clear that you're not speaking from as a member of the board or on behalf of the board. Okay. And I think the chair, it's onerous to put on the chair. Chair says no.
The chair does no. That's not how it works. It's not getting authorization or permission from the chair. It's simply notifying the chair if you're speaking to either the press or a governmental agency. It's not. And then also somebody raised this before and I didn't mention it. It's if you're, I forget who said it, I'm sorry. If you're the co-chair or the chair of a committee and you're doing your regular board business, an example I like to give is if Barbara and Natasha want to talk to anybody in the parks system doing regular business for the Parks Committee, they certainly do not have to contact anybody about that. They're doing their regular business because they're the chair, they're the co-chairs of the Parks Committee.
Or even if they're personalizing their comments and not being represented by the board, I don't think that members should be penalized, because my views, I don't bring onto the board what I really want to say. So I don't think we should be penalized for what is in our hearts and our passion, what brought us to the board. So, I'm going to speak what I feel.
I also question why I'm speaking to the press about something because they asked me. I'm not speaking for the board. Why do I have to speak?
It's only
inform
about
the chair.
It's only about matters that are actively before the board. That's all it is.
Active. Okay, so do I have to do it before I speak to the press or the government agency?
No, just notify
Right.
notify the chair.
Okay, at some point, close
It's
to
a
that.
reasonable point. The point is that the chair doesn't want to have to go to it. I mean, I've spoken to almost all the past chairs about this, and it's really uncomfortable for them to get ambushed and find out that somebody spoke to the press about something and gave the impression that it was on behalf of Community Board 7. And once again, we all know what we're talking about here, and the people who have experience with this, know what it is. It's very easy to say, and I've done this, I'm speaking as a private individual. This is my personal view, and I'm not doing it about a topic that's currently going on. That's all it is. And Madeline, nobody's penalizing you. And frankly,
they have, so that's why I mentioned it.
That's wrong. And I'd like to think that that's in the past, and I'd like to hear what you have to say, honestly. So can we now, are there any other questions about anything other than media affiliations or conflict of interest?
Okay, I have to go.
Okay.
Okay, I just want to say, I think this is an incredibly useful meeting, and you have done a great job in organizing this. So thank you very much. And I'm sorry I have to go, but I have to be someplace. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, Courtney, you have a quick comment about something other than media, conflict of interest? Or
super quick, just supporting everything Roberta said about timing. Miranda, I think some of the meetings that preceded you had people talking for much longer than the allotted time. I wanted to ask a question. I seem to recall when I was in the audience and not a member of the board, Shelley having a timer of some sort that we used in person. I think if we could have something that crossed both, so an in-person timer and a Zoom timer would be great, because it forces people to really think and clarify their thoughts in that time limit and self-regulate, and it provides a really nice metric. Hey, you can see your time is at 2 minutes. I think we should all be able to say what we have to say in 2 minutes or less.
Thank you. I think you were well under 2 minutes. As I said, last Thursday we had a special preservation meeting, and the timer was used, and it was, I mean, hat tip to Max, it was spectacular. It was really good. It was used for everybody. Anybody else? Jay, you have been waiting very patiently. You have a question about something other than media or conflict of interest affiliations?
I have a question as to what your procedure is at this meeting. I understand at the beginning you said you wanted to call on people who haven't had a chance to speak at the previous meeting. We've now covered 8 different areas with no opportunity to comment on any of them. And I just want to know what you want us to do, because
I'm sorry, Jay. I thought I was clear. I apologize if it wasn't clear. What I meant was initially to call on people who hadn't had a chance to speak to give quick thoughts, and then I went on to new topics. I thought I was clear about it. Did you have comments on any of the topics we've covered?
I had comments on every single one of them.
Okay.
But I obviously am not going to take all kinds of time. And when I did interrupt, it was to do a 30-second history on what Louisa said about term limits. So
okay,
I'll do whatever you want me to do, but
is there anything
you've gone from topic to topic to topic with no opportunity for several people who wanted to comment on them?
I'm so sorry.
Including Rich, who had his hand up, and Ken, who had his hand up. And
okay. I'm sorry. I thought that those were people who had their hands up waiting to talk about conflict of interest, because Rich had said that. And I kept saying, is there anything other than conflict of interest or affiliations? Okay, fine. Rich, do you have comments about other things?
Yes, I do. And I never said that my only comment is conflict of interest. I have so many things to say. This is a complete rewrite of our bylaws, and to do it in 2 minutes is completely impossible. First of all, you said at the beginning that since full board, quote, there are a number of changes we've made already. These were not done in a public meeting. There's no new draft documents. I don't even know what we're commenting on. It also seems that a number of members have privately emailed proposed changes, and that these are being made based on these private emails that have not been visible to the public or even to board members. And I'm wondering if this is a process that's being used to make future changes, and if there are other changes that will be made other than in public meetings, and who gets to decide on these changes, and if the full task force is voting on these, or if this is just one person making these changes. I know that there's going to be an up or down vote on this entire rewrite within a few weeks, without any time to publicly address many of these issues. I'm concerned there are just so many changes. There's no way to address even a small fraction of them. We only had 2 minutes to talk at full board, and that risks things slipping through, like completely forgetting about Robert's rules, not maliciously, it just was an oversight. I went through, I count 113 substantive changes. It might have been a 2-year process, but despite requesting it, we didn't see a release of a draft until a few weeks ago when we could finally go through and see what the changes are. I find 56 that I think are quick fixes. I don't think they'd be objectionable. It's things like Robert's rules, or one of them, the proposed bylaws remove language allowing the chair to shorten the speaking time for members of the public. It allows the chair to extend it, but not shorten it, which is in our current bylaws. Wouldn't think that's objectionable. I think it's just an oversight, but there are dozens of those. There are 19 items that I went through that I think warrant full board discussion. We've really gotten through just one of those today on a surface level, attendance. And we've talked a little bit about conflict of interest and talking to the media. There are a number of other items that really warrant discussion, and the board needs to consider them before we completely rewrite our bylaws. I have a few, and there's, again, no time to get through these. On the issue of speaking to the public or speaking to the media, the language currently says prior authorization. So it does say authorization, it does say prior, and that's a concern. I don't think any of us give up our rights when we become board members. We just can't say that we're speaking on behalf of the board. Our bylaws are clear about that now. I don't see why that should be changed. And definitely, I don't see that we need to give up rights. These other issues, I'm just going to read them because there's no time. We got rid of public members serving on.
There's plenty of time, and the word prior has been taken out. Go on.
When was it taken out? It wasn't done in a public meeting.
Rich, as I said before, we're taking input from every board member who wants to have it, and there's going to be a new draft sent out before the next meeting with red line on it, so you can take a look at all the changes. But please continue.
Okay, so other ones, we got rid of public members being able to serve on committees, subcommittees, or task forces. I think that warrants discussion. I think it's a mistake. We've had a lot of good input. The removal for cause, one idea is just give the person who's being considered for removal a choice between steering and executive committee, just because executive committee is a very small group that might not be representative of the entire board. It also says if the executive committee quote decides to remove a member for cause, making it seem like they might have the decision when the current bylaws say it's a recommendation.
Excuse me, if you're going to have a long list, I'll just interrupt you there and just come back on that. There's no way, it's very, very clear if you read the language that the executive committee has no authority to do that, that in either case, whether it's current bylaws or the new proposed bylaws, would any individual or any small body be able to remove somebody? It's only going to be a vote by the full board.
In which case it's an unobjectionable quick fix, but it shouldn't say decides to remove, it should say recommends, which is what our current bylaws say. Fine. But again, there are dozens of these. There's a question of how to get these in. As far as advisors and consultants, the law is very clear. It's an economic interest. So not making a hominum attacks on K, but K has clear interests.
Okay,
no one objects to them at all because we all support them.
Excuse me, I'm going to interrupt you on that one as well because the New York City Charter specifically uses the word consultant as when I define the word position, but go on.
But I believe it's with an economic interest.
It's not.
It's not.
It's not.
Well, we could look at that and discuss it, but that warrants discussion.
I have it in front of me. I can read it if you want to hear it.
You don't need to read it. It's done.
Yeah, and that gets to my point that like any one of these needs that time to read them and really think through what the right language is.
With try the OID, specifically for boards.
We got rid of the ethics committee. I'm not sure why. There had been language in our bylaws allowing a minority report if the minority disagreed with the majority. I think that's a good idea. The question of whether members of the public need to disclose if they live or work in the district or if they have relevant affiliations is something I think warrants discussion. We got rid of language saying that any member can propose a resolution to the full board and that it would be put on the agenda. We got rid of language saying that committee chair people preside over meetings. I assume that's a quick fix, inadvertent, but that's important language. We get rid of other duties of standing committee chairmen or chair people, including recognizing speakers and introducing and resolving agenda items. Also, probably a quick fix. also questions about amending the bylaws, not just, we got rid of the 1 month notice period for amendments. That we don't need a 1 month notice period for amendments. I know there's history with that warrants discussion. So my question is, I've got a long list of these 56 quick fixes. I'm uncomfortable sending it just to the task force without the entire board being able to see them, without it being done in a public meeting. But if we're doing an up or down vote in a few weeks on this, there's no time for public meetings to discuss all these items. And again, I didn't bring them up before because I didn't know what the changes were until I saw it after.
Excuse me 1 second. Are you aware that public meetings are only required when we're taking an actual board action? It's in the charter.
So we can clarify that. I'm not sure exactly if
yeah,
what the decisions are. I mean, because committee meetings definitely need to be public.
That's fine, but that's fine. I'm just saying, we can have private discussions. We can have all sorts of stuff as long as you're not taking any action. So
the question is changing a draft an action, and I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, I would welcome if you want to send me what you've written out. I'd be delighted to take a look at it and share it with the task force. Lots of other people have done that. It's been really useful. If you want to do that, it'd be great.
Yeah, and it gets to the question, both of other people and me, if it's proper to do it without being visible both to the full board and the public.
It is.
And I know we don't want to have like streams of emails, but we also, if changes are being made without public awareness or without other board awareness, I'm also uncomfortable with that.
Rich, I'm not going to go through this again. We've discussed it at length. Thank you so much for your input. If you'd like to send that, I'd be grateful to take a look at it. One thing I do want to clarify, though, is the executive committee versus steering. The executive committee is comprised of people that were elected by the full board. Steering are members of the board who have been appointed by one chairperson. So I would suggest that the executive committee is a better representation of the board because those are elected people. The disclosure by the public, there's no harm caused there by somebody saying, hi, my name is Jane Doe. I live in the district, I work in the district, whatever my affiliation is with the district, and then go on to speak. We're not suggesting that anybody can't speak. Anybody can speak, but I will point out an example I really like a lot, which is that there was a recent meeting where the only member of the public to speak, the only community member was somebody who lives in Canada. And this person has lived in Canada since 2009. Didn't relocate to Canada because of the pandemic, permanently moved to Canada in 2009, and this is the only person speaking about street safety. So I think, the person's entitled to speak. At our transportation meeting this past week, we had someone dialing in from Texas. That was great, but she lives in Texas. And she was very quick to say, I live in Texas. She used to be a board member, actually, but she said, I live in Texas and I have no real right to vote on this. So it's just really important to know where somebody stands, what their interest is. I love when Shelley says, I'm the executive director of WISFISH. I think I just won the triple daily there, by the way, because I was the third person to mention Shelley. Anyway, that's really important. And then the 1 month notice, if that was left out, that's a mistake on the amendments, and I will add that. But if you want to add those things, that would be really helpful and collaborative, Rich, and I would welcome it. Thanks so much. Ken, did you want to talk briefly or talk?
Well, how much more time do we have? Because I had something I wanted to say about affiliations and conflict of interest.
55 minutes, 5.
Are we going till 11?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't mean you should talk for a long, long time, but yeah, we're going to 11.
I don't need all that time.
Okay, that's
most of it.
By the way, everybody, Ken was on 94th Street for the entire transportation meeting the other night. I'm glad to see he's safely back in his apartment.
Yeah, it was a long night. On affiliations, I just wanted to read what our current bylaws say. It's one sentence. Any member who is an officer, director, or employee of, or a professional or service provider to an organization having a matter before the board where the member has discretionary decision-making responsibilities for that organization shall disclose his/her relationship with said organization before speaking, or if not speaking, before voting on that matter. Now, what you're proposing adds significantly to that. It adds advisor, it adds consultant, to the list of officer, director. It puts in parentheses, be it not for profit or for profit. It adds having a matter to, it adds to having a matter or an interest in a matter before the board. A very vague formulation, an interest in a matter. And then at the end, it says, if the organization has taken a position on such matter, the member shall vote present, but ineligible to vote. And then it adds, on top of that, any board member who holds a position in an organization as set forth in that previous section may not chair a committee if that committee is likely to have matters before it which concern that organization's interest. Can you explain what the reason is for all these changes that go way, way beyond what we've had and what appears to have served us quite well for decades?
Sure, it's a great question. Thanks so much for asking it. Let me just read there's been a lot of input on this, obviously. This is a popular topic. So let me read what the current language is right now. And, once again, I'm not really sharing stuff today because, based on this meeting, we'll have more changes to be made. And I want to stress here that there are 50 members of the board, 50, and everybody's got a view on this. Whereas the mayor says, I think there are 8 million people in the city and 30 million views, 30 million opinions. I mean, so not everyone's going to like the way this finally goes through eventually. But let me read the way it stands right now. Any board member who is an officer, director, advisor, or employee of, or professional service provider or consultant to an organization, be it not for profit or for profit, having a matter or an interest in a matter before the board, shall disclose their relationship with said organization before speaking, or if not speaking, before voting on that matter. If the organization has taken a position on such matter, the members shall vote present but ineligible to vote. And the quick answer to this is that this is based on a New York City charter. All it does is it clarifies some confusing areas or areas that were not well specified. And we've had enough instances with our board where there have been cause for concern that people felt the need to clarify it better. I said before that in the New York City charter, the definition of the word position includes consultant. Number 2 is probably a bigger thing. Any board member who holds a position in an organization as set forth in section 2E1 may not chair a committee if that committee we've taken out is likely to have and changed it to regularly reviews matters before it which concern that organization's interests. A committee shall be deemed to regularly review such matters if the committee considers or expects to consider such matters 3 or more times within a 12-month period. And that's also from the rules of New York and the city charter. And it just lays out very clearly, being the chair of a committee and controlling the agenda is a pretty powerful thing. I mean, so that's why you shouldn't be chairing the meeting. It's a pretty straightforward thing.
So what you're adding, it seems, based on the city charter, is the word consultant. Is that true?
I mean, I can do a word by word for you. I haven't done it.
Well, based on what you just said, it sounds like consultant is the thing that's in the charter that wasn't in our original language.
Susan, can I jump in? When we did the
can we recall that there are still people with their hands up and who are not just jumping in and waiting for the chair of this meeting to recognize them, people who have already spoken. So can we get some order in this thing? And I speak on behalf of myself and others who have sat patiently with their hands up through 8 different topics and still haven't had
Thank
a
you, Jay.
chance
Thank
to
you.
talk.
Well,
Thank you very much.
I think I still have the floor.
You do. Continue.
Okay. So yeah, I don't know. I think I know what you're referring to when you talk about concerns that have been raised by people about our current language. And there have been efforts in the past to target certain board members based on their affiliation with one particular advocacy organization. And I think it's pretty clear to me that these changes in language are specifically aimed at that and at that particular advocacy organization, which I'm not sure is a good enough reason to change our bylaws, because people have a an issue with the stance taken by one group. The conflicts of interest say that people should not use their positions as public servants to obtain private advantages for themselves or any individual business or organization with which they are associated. We're all on this board because we're connected in some way or another to our community. And that involves often being members of an advocacy group or a business promotion group or something like that. We're essentially saying that you can't be affiliated with one of these advocacy groups. And I just want to say the word advisor, which is put in, that's very clearly targeted at two people on this board, and I'm one of them. Both Howard and I used to be on the board of directors of Transportation Alternatives. I attended a lot of conflict of interest workshops at the BP's office, and invariably somebody would say, oh, they'd raise the Transportation Alternatives question. They would say, if you're a board member of Transportation Alternatives, is that a conflict of interest? And the answer from the expert presiding over the meeting was always, no, you don't have a financial stake. It's not a matter before the board, etc. But apparently that's not good enough. Howard and I are no longer on the board, but we are on Transportation Alternatives Advisory Council. And so I am guessing that that's where the word advisor, how the word advisor got in there. I think, we're talking about, how long members can speak. This is potentially silencing members and not allowing them to vote on matters that they have a passionate interest on and have no financial stake in whatsoever, which is what the conflict of interest and the affiliations should be about.
Thank you so much, Ken. No particular organization was targeted. I really can assure you of that. During our meetings, when we discussed this, we had a lot of discussions about all sorts of organizations, from the New York Hospitality Alliance to, the Department of Education. Every member of our board brings some expertise and some, affiliation to our work here. We're all volunteers. We all do a great job of volunteering our time. I joke a lot that I'm paid and the rest of you aren't. It's not funny. None of us are paid. And everyone appreciates everyone else's service. I appreciate your comments. I can assure you, though, that what we've done as a result of the last full board meeting is we've gone back and really ensured that we have not written any legislation and we have not overreached. All we've done is tried to clarify this to make it easier for people to follow. The best example I can give of this is that if I'm head of the PTA of PS whatever, and my school has applied to the community board for the right to close our street so we can have recess there, I should disclose that and I shouldn't vote on it because I'm a member of an organization, I'm an officer, I'm a director, I'm one of those categories. So, we're not going to litigate this here. I appreciate your thoughts. Thanks so much. Jay, you've been very patient. Would you like to have a couple comments?
First of all, I'm not so sure I've been so patient, but in any event, I was going to talk about one or two other things, but let me just comment on what Ken said, and let me preface it by saying there's nothing in the city charter or the New York City rules, or which are codified, or the conflict of interest board rules, or the published opinions of the conflict of interest board, which have the force of rule by law, that prevents anyone from any of the categories that Ken has mentioned or anyone else, be it a board member, an officer, a board of advisors, consultant, attorney, agent, all terms which are used in the definition of position in the city charter. There is nothing that prevents somebody from being on a community board. There is nothing that prevents somebody from being on a community board member from being a member of a committee that deals with the subject matter of that person's affiliation. There are only two things that affiliations and conflicts affect. Under very limited circumstances, it affects your right to vote. And even in that circumstance, you have a right to participate in the discussion. Under another limited circumstance, and Ken, this is not something that the task force committee came up with. This is law, that you are not permitted to chair a committee which regularly reviews matters of an organization or enterprise where you hold a position. That's the law. We simply adopted that from the law, and they specifically define regularly reviews, which is the phrase that I asked be inserted, as a committee which reviews or is likely to review 3 or more matters within a 12-month period. So all we're doing is adopting what's in the law. And those are the only restrictions. So when you say it would prevent people who are with organizations from being on community boards and excludes them, that's simply not the case. There are very limited situations in which it's appropriate for people and to disclose their affiliations. And as far as what you read, as far as the current bylaw is concerned, I was on the bylaws task force in 2012. The last time the bylaws, I think it kicked into 2013 when the bylaws were amended. The previous section on affiliations had specific language that said that if your organization that you're affiliated with, under all of those positional definitions, if that organization has taken a position on that matter, then you must answer present but ineligible to vote after being permitted and after disclosing your affiliation to participate in the discussion and say whatever you like. In 2012, the bylaws task force voted individually on every single section. Prior to the full board meeting, a draft of the bylaws was circulated, labeled final, which made no change in that section. The vote was taken, the new bylaws were approved. A couple of years later, something came up where I had occasion to check that section, and lo and behold, the language about the organization having taken a position which would then require the member to refrain from voting was gone. I raised it at a steering committee meeting, and I ultimately was asked not to offer an amendment, which I planned to do, because there would be another task force reviewing the bylaws in the near future. So that's the history of the current bylaw. And again, the bylaws that have been circulated can simply reflect what the law is. If some chair, or whether it's in the case that you mentioned, transportation or housing or any other, we've had issues sometimes on preservation with people appearing before the committee. There are times when this comes up, and all we want to do is follow what the rules are. And one very important point, I think it was Roberta who brought it up earlier. If people join the board and they're on a committee which overlaps their affiliation, and by the way, that includes a definition of in the law of other private interest. So it covers a broad spectrum of affiliations with organizations. But as Roberta rightly pointed out, one of the main functions of the Conflicts of Interest Board is to render opinions. any member who gets on a board, and you can do it when you get on the board if you want, can go to the Conflict of Interest Board and submit a request for an opinion, say, look, I'm on these organizations, basically in layman's terms, what am I to do? What are my obligations? What are my restrictions, if any, et cetera? That's what they're there for. So if there's any question, that's the avenue to take, and that's authoritative. No matter what our bylaws say, the charter, the New York City rules, and the language was taken from a section in the New York City rules pursuant to the charter. There's a whole section called Special Rules for Community Boards. These things are set forth there, and they're laid out in detail. Ethel, we see you. And you've already spoken a couple of times.
Susan, since he mentioned me by name several times, can I respond?
I think just let Jay finish.
So all I'm saying, Ken, is there are procedures for this. No one is excluded from the board or any committee. And as far as the exclusion from co-chairing a committee, that's the law.
I got to read you the law, okay? This is from the Conflict of Interest law. A member may not vote on any matter that could result in a personal and direct economic gain to the member or to anyone associated with the member. It speaks of economic gain. Okay?
Okay, Ken.
That's not what we're talking about.
Excuse me,
Okay,
Ken.
Ken.
Excuse me, Chair.
Susan, it's really, I need to read the law that refers to this,
Chair,
not what Ken.
Listen to the chair, please.
This is inaccurate.
Please. I get the chair's privilege here. Ken, that's true, but you didn't read the entire law. And Jay, we don't need to hear the entire law read. Anybody can take.
I just want to read the section on chairing a committee.
Okay, go ahead.
This is the special rules for community board meetings. For purposes of this section, a community board member shall not chair a community board committee or subcommittee that regularly reviews matters particularly affecting the member's private employer, financial interest, or other private interest, including the interest of any person or firm associated with member. For purposes of this
paragraph, a committee or a subcommittee of a community board regularly reviews matters involving the member.
That's what I just read.
I'm just going to continue for you. We're taking turns. Private employer, financial interest, or other private interest if the committee or subcommittee considers or expects to consider a matter involving the member's employer or interest 3 or more times within a 12-month period. And I would like to make sure for the record that we know that Jay is the one who found this for us because he did a lot of research on this. That's why
the law, Ken. It's not.
It clearly refers to pecuniary interest.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. It just doesn't.
Clearly does.
And
that's why at the borough president's conflict of interest meetings, workshops, when the question is raised, it is always said, no, that's not a conflict of interest.
Okay. Guys, we're not going to settle this. We're not going to settle this here. We're not going to settle this here. We've heard all the input. It's actually law, and we're going to move on. Barbara, you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. I have to leave in 4 minutes, but first I want to say that I have been on this committee for 2 years. We have worked with complete transparency in every respect. In addition to looking at the borough president's bylaws, we did a tremendous amount of research with Robert's Rules of Order, the brand new edition that just came out, which many of us have, and numerous other things. We've read the New York City Charter, the conflict of interest laws. Much of what I wanted to say was already said by Jay, so I will just skip. I want to say a couple other things, though. Sometimes I feel that some of you are trying to play a game of gotcha with us, like we didn't do something that we should have done or disclose something. We have worked with complete transparency from the very beginning. And Ken and Howard, since you used yourself as an example with Howard, and you are both on the advisory board now as the website for transportation alternatives clearly states, we did not at all target you or Howard, but there are numerous people on the board whose votes are very predictable. We have people on the transportation committee who are employed by transportation alternatives and should absolutely not be voting on issues. And yet it continues to happen, and it can't happen, which is why the language was strengthened a little bit. And we referred back to the COIB specific rules for community boards and put this language in. So thanks. And I have to go, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Someone is employed on the board who's a member of Transportation Alternatives.
Yes, I don't want to say who now, but I think
It's not appropriate. Okay, let's move on. Mark Diller, your hand is raised and you haven't spoken yet, and then we'll get to Miranda and then Rich.
Thank you. I originally took the same position as Miranda about listening more than speaking, but I'm moved to speak here because there's a perspective that I approach the process in 2011 to 2013, and Jay, it was 2011 to 2013. It wasn't. It was longer. It was even longer than you recalled. And that is this whole conversation about affiliations and about eligibility to vote. Let's put it that way. Concerns me in the following context, and I hope that this is a useful context to share. First and foremost, the board bylaws do now, and appropriately the new draft says, that it is our obligation to vote in the public interest. And I think that's the whole point behind both the affiliations position or construct in the bylaws, and of course, the conflict of interest and ineligibility to vote aspect of it. And I perhaps don't look like a Pollyanna, but maybe I am, because I believe that every one of us does that. I also believe that some of us found our way onto this board because we had a particular view of what that public interest is, and I'm about to lose my battery, so excuse me, about what that public interest is. And one of the things that I fear about the efforts that were made in the current bylaws, which I think it's fair to say were something of a compromise back then, and then revisiting that compromise now in terms of the language, not the concept, is how it's applied. And I mean that in the sense of elected official. I think it's actually a good thing. I promise I'm not getting too far away from the topic. I think it's a good thing that individual board members and even our leadership on the board does not have a role in determining our membership. I think that elected officials, for whatever combination of reasons, bring us all together. And sometimes, and I think Gail Brewer said this in a meeting once, sometimes they do it with the intention of mixing things up, of inserting points of view that might not otherwise be heard and probably will be relegated to minority opinions. And as a lifelong holder of minority opinions, I embrace that. But I think if you put those two concepts together, the idea that we're here because some elected official thought that our voice should be added to the mix, and an assumption that we are going to do what we honestly and truthfully believe to be the public's interest, then I think that should be infused in whether we are, how we are to speak, whether it be to the public, to the committees, agencies, I should say, committees of the city council, et cetera, how we should speak to each other, not, whether we should speak to each other and disclose certain things, and whether we should be eligible to vote. And I think that what just occurred to me in this meeting, so meetings are good. Sometimes I come up with something I didn't think of before. The compromises in 2011 to 2013, the attempts to make better sense of them, and I take on face value that this is a good faith effort to make better sense of them. Maybe the mischief is, and I credit Jay for saying this is the law, is in trying to rewrite the law. Maybe all we should say is that you can't vote when the law says you can't vote. And one of my comments at full board was that expanding the language might have the effect of preventing a board member from taking advantage of the attorney of the day at the conflict of interest board, where you can call up and say, I'm about to be presented with a resolution on XYZ, or in my case, I'm about to be offered free tickets to a nice event in the community. Can I take them? If the language of our bylaws is different than the language of the statute, then the COIB can't help me. And I will tell you that, I've made generous use of that provision many times in the past. But I want to go back to the 35,000 feet and say that I'm concerned about trying to gild a lily a little bit, about trying to improve upon something that I might be absolutely, you all know that there are aspects of the conflict of interest laws that I firmly disagree with. The whole business about how a person who is employed by the Department of Education can't chair our YEL committee is insanity to me, because A, the Department of Education is never, never, an applicant to our board. They don't care what we think. And B, that I have every confidence that if it were, that the people on the committee would do the right thing. But that's the law. So we're stuck with the law. And I think that maybe we can avoid a lot of both hurt feelings and unnecessary parsing if we simply say, you're ineligible to vote when the city charter says you are. By the way, I want to add one more suggestion to that long dissertation. And that is that I firmly believe in the opposite direction, that even if the law says that I'm eligible to vote, that I should be given, and I think the bylaws should reflect, that I should be empowered to recuse myself, even if the law says I don't have to. And I've actually done that in my very first vote on the community board in April of 2008. I recused myself because I was a member of an organization that was being proposed to be a landmark. I didn't understand the law at the time, but I think that all of us should have that it's too close to my heart to vote on option. And I think that we should record that too. Anyway, you've been very generous with your time. There are lots of other things that I could say, but I think that this is the most important thing relative to the meeting we've got right now. So thanks for the time.
Mark, thank you so much for that careful thought. What I'd like to give is an assurance that we are not rewriting anything. We're lifting the language directly from the city charter and the New York City rules. And once again, with thanks to Jay for sending me in the right direction, because it's hard to wade through all that stuff. No one is being targeted. Ken, you're not going to believe me, but that's true. I do want to say that when people get married, it's a happy event usually. And even though they're doing that, oftentimes they have a prenuptial agreement that says what will happen if this doesn't work out. My ketubah, my Jewish wedding contract, actually has the Lieberman clause in it, which says that in the event that my husband and I don't stay married, he's required to give me a Jewish divorce. It's not like we have to discuss it later. So it's already in there and it's hanging proudly on our wall. That's why these things are in here. So I have to say, I think that it's nice to view the world in a bright, sunshiny way, Mark. But I do think we do need to have this in here. And the city charter obliges us to have bylaws. And so since we have them, we will have something in here that specifies and makes it easily accessible for our members so they don't have to dig through it. Rich Robbins, who's I guess no longer at the meeting, said that we, quote, got rid of the public members. We didn't get rid of them, but the bylaws were already getting pretty long, and public members is really well covered in the city charter. So there are things that we have not included because they're in the city charter. I think the conflict of interest, given the amount of conversation about this, it's clear that people really care passionately about it. I think this should be laid out pretty clearly. Jay, did you want to say something again?
Just very quickly. Mark and I are basically on the same page, which is, and frankly, we don't have a choice. We have to comply with the law. I do disagree that we shouldn't put the language in the bylaws, because that would be even worse if a situation occurred. There'd be no reference point, and which is why I tweaked our original draft to be exactly what was in what was in the law so that there's no question about it. And as finally, as Mark, I agree with you 100% that we are required. And I think with rare exception, most of us dedicate ourselves and are committed to acting in the public interest. However, there are many instances where your opinion or my opinion or others have a different definition of what is best for the community and what is in the public interest. I think one of the best examples that we had recently was the situation with the transfer of homeless people into several hotels in our district. There was a very sharp divide as to what was in the public interest in terms of the care of and provision of services to the affected homeless population versus safety issues in the community. And in that sense, there are issues like that where people genuinely have a different view of what is best for the community and in the public interest. And these rules, when you boil them down to their essence, simply recognize the fact that it's informative to our colleagues and to the public to understand if we have an affiliation or are employed or something that brings to our view of a situation a particular viewpoint. And I can't emphasize enough that there's nothing about any of this that ever prevents anyone from being a member of the community board, being a member of a committee that considers relevant issues and has a right to comment. It's only in the very, very particularly defined case that someone may be ineligible to vote. And again, as far as chairing or co-chairing a committee, the rule, that's the law. And we are bound as a community board to comply with it. And it's not that complicated.
Yeah. Can I just say, I apologize to my fellow task force members because you've heard this a lot of times, but I don't want to embarrass her, but Ethel Sheffer gets the award for the most concise, not concise, but I remember a whiskfish vote where we were at Fordham Law, I believe, and Ethel got up and left the room during the discussion and during the vote. I don't know if it's because Ethel, you're not a good poker player, so you were afraid you were going to make faces. Probably that's part of it, but that's a pretty clear, self-governing, like, I'm out of here. Roberta?
I just wanted to comment on a couple of things.
Sure.
On the elections, I think I'm fine with the 2-year election. I want to remind everybody that we are all now term limited. And everyone has 8 years if they started. I'm in the class that has 5 years if I stay on that long. So I think having an election for 2 years is a good thing. And I think we have to start looking at some of the language about, moving committee chairs around. We want to start having, developing new leadership. So I don't know if you want to put that in there. Just to comment on the public members. The reason we removed CB7 had public members until I think when we passed the bylaws in 2013. The reason we removed the public members is that according to the charter, they were part of the quorum. So for example, if Health and Human Services had 4 public members and 6 board members, that would be 10 and their quorum would have to be 6. So if 2 of the, to make a quorum. So if the 4 public members didn't show up and one of the board members was sick, you didn't have a quorum and you couldn't vote. And sometimes if it was something that was going before an agency with a time, you have the vote prior to the next meeting, it was a big problem. So we members.
Thank you, Roberta. We didn't get to it. I didn't mention it yet, but the standing committees, we had carried over the language from the last version of the current bylaws about the term limits for the co-chairs and chairs. And it was pointed out that with the new term limits for community board members, a 6-year limit for a chair or co-chair is overly generous. So that was something that we want to change a little bit and make it shorter. I don't know if anybody has a view on that. We should come back to that later. Miranda, did you have a comment? Or is your hand still up?
Oh, no, sorry, that was from earlier. I'll take my hand down. Thank you.
Okay. Let me see what else we have here. Should we move on to the standing committees and discussion about what we think would be an appropriate term limit for that? Anyone have any comments on anything else? Jay?
Yeah, well, just full disclosure, I'm against term limits because at least with elected offices, we have limited terms. We don't need term limits, but committee chairs are appointed, so that's a different issue. And my feeling has always been if a board chair wants to churn chairing committees, they have the absolute ability to do so. And with the new law, as Roberta pointed out, people are going to be term limited for the first time. And in order to make it an issue, you'd almost have to be appointed co-chair of a committee practically immediately when you join the board. And that's certainly unlikely to happen. So I just don't think it's necessary. I mean, I don't know that I would oppose some reasonable term limit, but with term limited board members, it seems it's almost unnecessary.
Well, the issue here is if, let's say the term limit is 8 years, so if you can be a co-chair for 6 years, that means that somebody's got very little chance of ever getting to be a co-chair.
But again, the chair also always has a discretion to rotate chairs. I mean,
yeah, that's not likely to happen. But Shelley, you're muted.
I'm in agreement with Jay. When you elect people for offices, you can elect them or not elect them. If you, since chairs can appoint people, if it should be up to the chair who's currently elected to make those decisions. There may be situations where we want and we have co-chairs. If we didn't have co-chairs, I might look at it a little different. But you can keep someone who's extremely valuable in that position in for a longer time. And the most it could be was 8 years. And now probably less. Okay. I think there's a way to handle that. It doesn't have to be rigid. And I think we should eliminate term limits for co-chairs.
Okay. Do we have anybody who objects to taking out the term limits for co-chairs? I'm going to lower your hand, Jay, and Shelley's going to lower your own hand so I can see.
Obviously.
Is there anybody who objects to taking out term limits for co-chairs? Anybody? Going once, going twice. Okay. Oh, Seema, yes. You want to talk to the point?
Yeah, sorry, it took me a minute to think it through. I do think that having term limits is a good thing. It just gives more leadership opportunities to the rest of the board members. And I think having some sort of fresh perspectives every now and then. I mean, I think it's a 6-year term limit right now. So, I mean, I feel like that's plenty of time to establish yourself and get stuff done, but still allow for some fresh perspectives to come in every now and then.
So can we have a compromise in this, folks? Do you want to make it 3 or 4 years?
That's not a.
That's the other way.
Compromise.
That's not a compromise.
That's going the other way.
Okay.
The compromise would be to leave the 6 years, but again, that means you'd have to be appointed to chair a committee within the first 2 years that you're on the board. I'm just suggesting that it's pretty unlikely, and it's sort of just unnecessary.
Okay, Roberta, you've got. Actually, I should call on people who have their hands digitally up. Courtney, we've heard less from you. Go ahead.
All right. So we're all home with COVID, and I've got 2 kids home. So that's sorry, I may have missed this. Good times over at my household. We have term limits coming in anyway. So aren't, by the definition of we're going to have to be taking 2 years off a board, aren't people going to be by definition term limited from their committee chair position?
The notion is that if you're already term limited in 8 years and the limit for a co-chair is 6 years, it doesn't give a lot of opportunity for somebody who's been on for 8 years. You have to sit around and wait for 6 years.
Yeah.
That's the concern. Beverly?
Yeah, again, it took me some time to think this through. I do think that making sure we have a culture in place where we're bringing in and developing leadership is just really important. So I would be in favor of some kind of term limit there. I would also point out that even though folks are term limited, you can come back after and reapply to be a member of the board after a certain number of years. And so you could, in fact, have people who end up with certain breaks in service, serving as a co-chair for an extended period of time, well beyond the term limit current language of 6 years. So I would like to see a slightly shorter length of time for co-chair.
Okay, Michele?
Hi, being co-chair of preservation, I'm telling you, is a baptism by fire. And I'm learning a lot from my committee members and everybody on the board and Landmarks Preservation Commission. And while I think hitting the ground running, I was good at the leadership, it's the technical stuff that took me longer. So I would not be for term limits. I really need all that time to become, like I said, from the get-go, I was in the and I still love the leadership position. I think I'm good at that, but the technical aspects, I need more time. I need all those years.
Okay, very good. Mark?
So I'm opposed to term limits in general. So at most I would want to keep the ones that we've got, but I raised my hand because I thought that Roberta, and now I think Bev has just echoed it, I think we should add that it is the responsibility of everyone in leadership of the board to bring along the next generation of leadership, that we should actually say that out loud rather than just have it be a subtext. So that's sort of a positive spin rather than the negative, which is you are prohibited and after X number of years. That's my addition. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Courtney? And then Roberta.
Sorry, yeah, I've been taking me a minute to process all this. So I speak as someone who actually just got appointed to leadership last year. I agree with the baptism by fire, but I would also point to the fact that I've had a lot of help from Stephen, from Mark, from Bev, and I lean on, especially I'm looking at Bev and Mark and Roberta, who's here. And so I do think there is they know I lean on them every month for help, for suggestions, for have you seen this before? What have you done in the past? I think there is something to the baptism by fire with a big support system. And I think if we don't have term limits, then you don't have that experience. I think you sometimes don't get forced to really stretch and learn unless you're put in that position. It doesn't preclude the fact that we need that experience on the committees and we need a culture of helping the people that we're bringing along. But I will tell you that it's been a very steep learning curve with an awful lot of support that I think that creates the ability to turn around and help the next people along. And if we don't have turnover, I think we are not giving the new people that experience and that ability to have that steep learning curve.
So you're in favor of the term limits?
I think I'm coming out in favor of the term limits. Yeah. Okay.
And what would be a time period you'd be comfortable with? It's 6 right now. I think people agree that's too long.
To me, I'd say 4 because it's half of that 8-year term limit. Right. Yeah. So you're turning over at least once during your period of time.
Okay. Roberta?
Cross Bronx Expressway.
I would say 4 or 5. It doesn't matter. And I do think we have to put in about developing leadership. And I had a couple of other points that I just write out and send to the committee. If that's okay.
Okay.
Just some wording. But the one thing I did want to add that we didn't do a good job with in 2011, 2012 is when you're quoting language from the charter or language from the state, that's a law, that you just put in a quotation marks around it and where you found it, whether it's city, state, just so that we don't have arguments going forward, that people understand. And I think that was a big mistake where we goofed last time.
It's easy enough to do. It's a great suggestion.
No, wait, excuse me, are we stopping at 11?
Yeah, I think we need to because Roberta's got a meeting starting at 11.
Okay, I just want, because I've got shared computer issues.
Yeah, okay. So we've got 6 more minutes. We give Roberta a minute to get started. Ken?
I don't have a meeting.
I'm sorry, Roberta?
I had to cancel my meeting.
Oh, you canceled it?
Yeah, because it had to be at 10, so we canceled it.
Oh, thank you. I'm so sorry. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay. Ken?
I agree with Jay on this, on the term limits. I think term limits are an artificial way of managing things. This is why this is one of the main powers of a chair, to make these decisions. I think Mark's language that he proposed is really great. We should do that. But term limits is a double-edged sword. You lose really great people, or you might lose, people you don't particularly like, or you bring along people who really deserve a chance. But that should be up to the chair. This is why we elect a chair, and it's one of their main, probably one of their main powers. So I would be opposed to at the least 6 years, and I favor no term limits at all.
Okay. Shelley?
Yeah, we've had chairs recently who have been very generous with allowing new leadership to come as co-chairs to committees. I don't think we're suffering with the problem right now. And I think that, I think Mark's language, a positive thing, encouraging development of young leadership is what's important. And I think that it'd be good for a newer person or less experienced person to have the advantage of some people, I'm not talking about myself, but some people on the board who are so knowledgeable and such a resource as a co-chair that not having them there would be a big loss, not only to the committee and to that co-chair, but also to the board.
Okay, thanks. Madge? Madge, are you there? Your hand is up. Maybe you hit something.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I'm out on the street now. I was just listening, but I just wanted to put my vote in for a 4-year term limit because I think that we have to know that we have to bring people along and not just like wait for 6 years and the last year decide that maybe we should prepare someone. I think it should always be in the words to prepare people to be committee co-chairs.
Thanks so much. Okay, can I just ask for, I'm going to lower all the hands and then let's have a show of hands of folks who forget the amount of time, but who wants, this is not a vote, it's just to give a sense of what direction we're going in here. Who's in favor of a term limit? Please raise your hand. Okay, so I see 8, including Madge's hand, and I'm going to lower all the hands if I can. Or can you lower your hands? Everybody lower your hand. Okay. Okay, and then so that was 8. So anybody in favor, that was in favor of term limits, 8. Who's not in favor of term limits?
Sorry, I blew the vote.
Did you vote twice, Mark?
Sorry, I thought you already called negative, so I was intending to vote negative.
Okay, so were you counted in the 8?
I think so.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so it's slightly in favor of term limits. Okay, but this is just directional. I'm just curious. This is gonna be one of those things that's gonna be, I mean, I didn't vote. It's a tough one to call. People have made really great arguments on both directions. This is gonna have to be one of those things we have to figure out. And I think that it'll get meshed out hopefully at the next meeting. So with that being said, if there's anything else anybody would like to talk about, we've been at this for 2 hours. Lowering all the hands. Any other comments, questions, suggestions? Okay.
Susan, little things like it appears that the ability to demand a roll call vote at a full board meeting has been dropped. Is that an intentional thing, or is that just a nit that we should pick?
Yeah, that was discussed at great length, and I'm sure I've said it 100 times that I was in favor of an initial and final roll call, and I was voted down on that. So
I'm sorry, not as to attendance, but the current bylaws say that when we're voting on a resolution, we usually do a show of hands. But a member is privileged, and I think it's in Robert's rules anyway, but a member is privileged to ask for a roll call vote. And I'll tell you that it is not trivial in that the number of votes cast in a roll call vote is often different than the number of raised hands. But it also takes time and is a nuisance and so forth. So was that dropped intentionally, or is that just one of those things?
No, thank you. I know I have asked for a roll call vote, so that was not dropped intentionally. And thank you for pointing out. I will add that back in.
It is Robert's rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so, but you know, but it was in the current bylaws, I think. So.
Yep, it was.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I just called Robert and he agreed.
And he ruled?
No, he didn't rule. Ken?
Yeah, as Rich mentioned, there are 113 changes at least. And we've gotten through, I don't know, 6 or 7. There was one I was going to mention, but if it requires a lot of discussion, I guess we should table it until the next meeting. But, you know, I don't know how we're going to get through all the rest of the 100 or so. So shall I mention that one and just see if it was a mistake?
Please do. And we still have a quorum of the committee, so go ahead.
Okay, so this was something which was in the old bylaws and isn't in the new ones, which would allow any member to bring a resolution to the full board sua sponte.
That's been mentioned already. Thank you.
So is it back in, or?
It's been mentioned. We'll consider it.
Going to consider it. And in terms of the consideration, you know, the reason we have an open meetings law is that so the public can sort of be a party to the deliberations of a group, of a public body. And it sounds to me like, you know, a lot of these issues are being decided behind closed doors and not even voted on.
Was that a question?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that's what's happening, but you know, what can I say? I mean, the meetings have been noticed. You've been to several meetings. You know,
well, like just in this case, you know, you're saying, well, we're going to, you know, that's been raised, but when's the decision going to be made on it? Is it going to be made in a public meeting?
Yeah, of course it will. Yeah.
With a vote.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have one more, you know, lengthy bylaws task force meeting. We've had a number of them. I'm going to incorporate, take a look back at the borough president's template, consult with the task force, take a look at the current bylaws again, take a look at the city charter again, take a look at the New York City rules again, all of these things. I mean, as Barbara said pretty clearly, none of this was done out of thin air. A lot of work has gone into this. The public is only required to be there when the board takes an action, Ken. You know, the Broadway task force met for 2 years without a meeting ever being noticed. There were never any meeting minutes. I mean, you know, and actions were taken. So this is a very different process. And I really, I don't agree that it's not open to the public. But at any rate, what I said at the beginning of the meeting, I'm standing by that we will send back out a document that has got, you know, red lines of all the changes. It's a difficult thing.
The Broadway task force has minutes and every meeting had minutes. Every meeting was public.
Okay.
And people, non-task force members attended it. And any action it took went to the Transportation Committee for a vote.
Okay, I stand corrected. I know I tried to get the meeting minutes and it was difficult to do, but at any rate, be that as it may, we're going to recirculate this, redistribute it. People can, and I urge everyone to, take a careful look at it. I was a little disappointed the number of people who said they had not yet had a chance to take a look at it, even though we sent it out a week before the full board meeting. So I'd urge people to do that. And if Rich wants to send in his list of 113 changes or whatever it is, that would be great.
That's what he should do.
I think that's what he should do. I mean, I will say that it was great that Rich took the time to do a red line, but it wasn't entirely accurate. So he did acknowledge the fact that over 2 years, there are a lot of changes made and it's very difficult to look at something like that. We never had one version. It just was impossible to look at it with all the commas and dots and things changing. So at any rate, do we have a call to adjourn the meeting?
Call to adjourn and to thank the chair.
Thank you so much, Shelley.
Bye.
Second.
Thank you.
On the thanks.